皆さん、こんにちは。Today's theme is Indigenous Australian and Maori loan words.
先生はオーストラリアのご出身ですよね。
I'm a true blue Aussie.
そうじゃないと困ります。本日は、True Blue Aussie とおっしゃるウェイクリン先生にアボリジニの人たちの言葉について教えてください。
Certainly. Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal Australians, have lived on the Australian continent for over 60,000 years. Theirs is the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. The British settlers who came to Australia, of course, along with colonisation, brought with them the English language.
アボリジニの人たちは日常生活で英語は話しているんですか？
Yes, they certainly do. And at the same time, Aboriginal languages continue to have a presence in Australia. Today we're talking about loan words. Now, language is complex, very complex, and languages change over time. So in the case of Australian English, yes, it's almost completely understandable to English speakers from other contexts. It does have some unique Indigenous Australian influenced words. For example, similarly in New Zealand, we also see how Maori language has influenced today's New Zealand culture and Kiwi English.
なるほど。ではウェイクリン先生、最近のその借用語の流れについて教えてください。
Well, Indigenous culture is indeed incredibly important to both countries. And in New Zealand today, the common word for New Zealand is not even used. More commonly, New Zealand people will say Aotearoa, and this is the Maori name for the country. Similarly, in Australia, we have a shift toward Indigenous words. Now, Indigenous identity, as you can see, is an absolutely essential part of today's Australia and today's New Zealand.
それではウェイクリング先生、具体的な借用語の例を教えてください。
Yeah, let's look at both Australian and New Zealand examples. First loan word I'd like to share with you is yaka. Yaka is a common phrase used in Australia today. It means hard work. Hard yaka. And that was hard yaka. Yaka is an alternative word for yaga. Now yaga means the same thing in an Aboriginal language. It means hard or exhausting work. This word comes from the Yagara people in Meanjin, otherwise known as today's Brisbane, which is in northeastern Australia. Many Australians of my generation associate yaka with working class culture. And this is something that industrial clothing brand Hard Yaka, Australia's equivalent of Workman in Japan, took advantage of to advertise their products as strong and durable during hard yaka. My next word for you is kui. Kui! 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 Kui was a very popular word in colonial literature. This word presented to a colonial British audience an impression of what Australian life was like. And we can see how Aboriginal language greatly influenced the language of the settlers in Australia. Kui is still used today. It's not just a piece of history. We use it just as you might use yaho, very much in the same way. It originally meant come here in Aboriginal language, and it comes from today's Sydney area, the Darug Nation. And kui is such a rich Australia expressing word that if you use this word, I'm sure the person listening will think, wow, that person has a great awareness of Australian culture.
ありがとうございます。では次にマオリの人々の言葉について教えてください。
Certainly. Now, in the case of Aotearoa, New Zealand, first word I'd like to share with you is tumeki. Tumeki means too much. Too meki. That's too meki. But this is too much not as a negative, but too much as something great. Just like in today's Australia, we might use, that was awesome. Yeah, they say tumeki. It's a sort of exclamation, and it's used to express some form of delight. The second word is pakaru. Pakaru means broken down or ruined. My smartphone is pakaru. My TV is pakaru. Now, pakaru was popular enough in the colonial period that in the 19th century, pakarude, obviously a loan word, had entered the colonial English lexicon. However, the influence of Maori speakers in New Zealand today have kept pakaru, not pakarude, but pakaru itself alive. And so many people in New Zealand today would understand you if you said, my smartphone is pakaru, my TV is pakaru, when something is ruined.
ニュージーランドといえばラグビーのオールブラックスのハッカークールですよね。
It's cool. So, in other words, I think if we've learnt anything today, we've learnt that Indigenous identity is a really important part of Australian and New Zealand English. And indeed, today there's a stronger push to acknowledge the influence and presence of Indigenous identity. These words were used before settlement and they continue to be used today. Those efforts have succeeded, pushing towards greater acknowledgement. We see today in Aotearoa, indeed, it's called Aotearoa, and we see in the case of Australia, many young people using the Aboriginal word for particular cities, such as Mianjin for Brisbane or Naarm for Melbourne. So, yaka, kui, tumeki, or pakaru, if you use these words, you're not just using a rare or curious word, you're actually using a word with great value in both Australia and New Zealand. So why not try out some of these words with your friends? They will show that you're conscious of the special identity that Australia and New Zealand have in the global English context.
ウェイクリング先生、今日のお話は to make it ですね。では
皆さん、さよう
さような
な
ら
ら。